Welcome to In Demand, a podcast about independent cinema exhibition. I'm your host, Tara Judah. I'm a postgraduate researcher at the University of the West of England, and I'm researching the role of independent cinema in the age of on-demand culture. So I'm embarking upon a journey into better understanding a wide range of film exhibition practices. Joining me on today's episode is Dr. Peter Walsh. He is the co-founder and co-director of Southwest Silence, a curator and researcher for Bristol's Classic Archive and Repertory Film Festival Cinema Rediscovered, and my co-conspirator for film, performance and video essays for the Critics' Choice programme at the International Film Festival Rotterdam. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, Tara. Thanks for having me.
Peter, as this is the very first episode of In Demand and you're my first ever guest, I wanted to outline for both you and for the listener how the format of this show will function. Peter, let's start with what's most significant to you about your experience of working in the film exhibition sector.
What's most significant? That's an interesting question. I feel it's maybe the networks of people I work with, the connections I've got from research and just cinema going in a place like Bristol, but also working within areas of specialised cinema, which for me has predominantly been silent cinema, but with my colleague James Harrison, we're moving more into film noir as well. I kind of want to widen that into sort of film heritage more generally, and working with exhibitors and distributors and artists, practitioners who work with film. Primarily for us with silent cinema, it's musicians, but I'm open to working with other practitioners as well. It's a big and open, expansive area, and I find that quite interesting to consider cinema beyond what we understand cinema to be, and reframing historical films, old films, for want of a better term, in a new and interesting way.
It's curious what you said about what we understand cinema to be. What do you think? Maybe you could unpack that a little bit, what we understand cinema to be, and then maybe your differentiation for the aspirations you hold.
Well, cinema's, it's an interesting thing. Cinema is a building which exists on the high street, which for a very long time people went to every Friday or every day of the week, and now it's something that people do a lot more sporadically. I think conventionally it's not a lot of people who go to the cinema every week. It's maybe a couple of times a year these days for most people. It's also, to be blunt, in the age of streaming, it's a category alongside TV series and shorts, movies. It's just a category on the sidebar that you pick alongside any other number of forms of content that you might consider. And therefore, cinema in that sense, when I approach it, I want it to be something that stands out and sticks out from that. It's not quite a gig. It's not quite going to the cinema on a Friday night. It's something unique. It's something one-off, and it's something that you really don't want to miss.
So what is it that makes it something you don't want to miss? What makes it that thing that is different to just the content on the sidebar that you would see? What in your mind is different about this experience?
For us, it's quite consistently curation. It's about finding stuff that hasn't been shown or hasn't been seen before in this region, in this area. So when it comes to film noir, I know my colleague James is very good at sort of staying abreast of new research, new discoveries, new restorations in that field, and he's in contact with quite a number of people. We're quite successful in getting the rights to show a number of Mexican film noirs that have been very well received. It's quite exciting to say that we have the exclusive UK rights to distributing those films, which is kind of mad because it's just me and James, two guys in Bristol who try and put film events on, and a film archive in Mexico has trusted us to find an audience for those films. And that's something unique, both in terms of Mexican cinema, but also film noir. It's quite unusual. It's quite unknown. It's something you can't easily see on streaming. It's something you can't see on DVD or Blu-ray, at least not yet. So that's something unique. But also in our second strand, we do silent film events. And then it's a question of showing something that will bring out a crowd. I guess that's a question that I consider a little bit myself. It's about showing something that is unique and different enough to pull out a crowd of people, and then trying to match it with a music or musicianship which will enhance the film and give the film a unique one-off sense to it, which is something that you can imbue a silent film with. Those are questions that I consider when we're looking at what to program and how to find an audience.
So it sounds like you've got kind of an emphasis on scarcity is important to you, and the concept of something being unique in that it is different or can be differentiated from what is available or can be emulated elsewhere. Does that mean for you, I guess it's kind of content driven?
Yes, I think it's interesting in part what you say, because it is scarcity driven insofar as it's not wide or broadly known. Ironically, both with the film noirs and with the silent films that we show, sometimes you can find these films on YouTube or other streaming channels online. So you could, if you're absolutely desperate, you probably could find a version of these films to watch. But for us, there is something very important about seeing it on the big screen, seeing it with an audience, and potentially seeing it with live music, or in a unique restoration, or with a unique score, whether that's live or recorded. So scarcity, yes, to an extent, but not necessarily exclusivity.
Do you think if there's something there about the kind of scarcity, is there also like an inherent kind of paradox in that the scarcity means that the audience awareness is potentially not so high, and that then there surely must be kind of more work to do, or otherwise, you'll be sort of having closed loop audiences. What's the sort of the trade-off there with this paradox of like being able to bring that scarcity but still being able to locate audiences?
We are a private, I hesitate to say professional. It is a professional. It's not our full-time jobs, but it's a business we conduct to be profitable. And for us, it's definitely a question of finding the right margin and the right level of profitability for events that we coordinate, organise and present. And we've certainly put on events that are perhaps too niche and have not been as profitable as we'd maybe desire. But then sometimes we do put on what, at least in silent film terms, is quite crowd-pleasing fare. Crowd-pleasing is maybe the wrong term, but sort of recognisable, top bill, A1, top-tier stuff that people want to see, that there is a presumed built-in audience for, even within a cinephile community. But we want to sort of balance that with pushing against people's expectations or people's limits. So it's in part building up an audience, but also bringing that audience with you for more esoteric stuff and stuff that isn't on the top 100 lists or on recommended lists of things to see. Things that they will very probably not have heard of, but might be entrusting to us to watch because they've seen us do interesting things before.
There's also this element of building up a kind of brand, and what you're saying about that sort of familiarity, so that people begin to know and trust you, and so they trust you as the curators, rather than necessarily searching for the content first, even though to some degree it is content driven because there is an element of scarcity. But the other thing that I think you just connected to is this very thorny issue of the fact that you sort of mentioned quite in passing what I would say is kind of like a really key issue in the industry, which is that this is supposed to be a profitable business, but also this is not a full-time pursuit for you and your business partner, James. So James Harrison, who you've been speaking about. So I wondered if you could talk a bit more about that kind of tension and what your thoughts are on the fact that this is really true, I think, for a lot of people and true in a lot of instances. I certainly have a lot of experience personally in my own journey, having worked sort of freelance and very ad hoc over the years before I worked, in a more embedded way in the industry. But having worked sometimes not as my main job or as my main job, but with another job on the side to financially support myself, or just kind of finding different ways to sort of survive in this industry, which does feel often like you're being either a volunteer or you're working for just breaking even. So I don't know if you want to say something more about the kind of structure and what your thoughts on that are.
I guess the context to give for our organisation is that we were born out of, I guess the best way to describe it is a volunteer organisation. Our first sort of screenings were born out of film screenings done in the upstairs room of a pub to an audience of 10 to 15 people who were a mix of friends, family, and extended networks of contacts of people that we know would like silent films. And we'd show interesting and esoteric things on DVDs that we'd accrued from hither and yon with recorded scores. And this was very well received. And from this, we developed into doing live events, mostly in part because we realized there could be funding for these things, because this is a element that was funded by the British Film Institute through various initiatives. And this is something we saw an opportunity to do, so we pursued that. And that has drawn in money, but knowing what I know about the industry, I know there are very few people who work wholly in the niche of silent cinema who hew that road and drive enough of a profit to sustain themselves in the UK. I guess the only people I can think of primarily are silent film musicians who, they're traveling musicians in a proper sense of the term, and they go from festival to festival, from occasional gig to occasional gig. But the fact of the matter is a lot of them also work alongside this, performing in dance schools, in music schools. None of them teach that I know of, but they do a number of things to sustain themselves alongside this. But generally the work they do is flexible enough to allow them to disappear to another European country for a long weekend to play silent cinema pieces. There aren't many people outside of an archive context who can work wholly within silent cinema and make a full-time living from it. I'll be honest, I've thought about how I could potentially do that in the UK, doing what I do, because we are a regional operation and we do sporadic events. And part of me wonders, well, if I did this full-time and did rolling events across the UK, could I make a full-time job of it? And I guess at a push I could, but I doubt very much that I could confidently say that I'd earn enough of a crust to carry on confidently. Don't know. I don't think there's enough of an audience to drive it. And it'd be a bit weird because I'd be running in parallel to people who work for quite established distributors and have quite established full-time jobs distributing, talking pictures from Hollywood from the 70s, 80s and 90s who have quite a successful go of it. But their overheads are quite different to my overheads in terms of running a silent film.
There is a problem then of whether or not this sort of cinema, if we want to call it that, is then just a hobby that some people put on for a niche group of people, or whether or not, like the sort of, maybe we should start to look at, we've mentioned the sort of funding that supports the activity that you do. Then why, or should it be supported by a national body? Why should it be given money if it's only a niche activity for small groups of people? It doesn't reach a wide audience. It doesn't reach a large general public. We're talking about scarcity for a difficult to develop audience. And, I'm being quite provocative with that question for you because I know the reasons why you do it. But I do kind of wonder, what is the longevity and sustainability of this sort of work if we have a model where it has to be heavily funded to exist? The people who work in the sector largely have to do it as volunteers or for free, or for very little. And the audiences that are served are so niche anyway, and they're still paying, even though it's financially supported by a body such as the British Film Institute, the BFI. Maybe you could talk a little bit also about your you as not a independent cinema, you as a collective of people, or a group of people who are putting on events in other venues or in partnership with other venues, are you a member of, for example, the BFI's Film Audience Network, which therefore has regional film hubs like Film Hub Southwest? So we're talking about the southwest of England. If you could talk about your relationship with the Film Hub, with BFI Fan, and how that kind of funding filters through to you.
So in some respects, it's worth saying that Southwest Silence was born out of Bristol Silence. So to begin with, we were a Bristol-based, we still are Bristol-based, and that's in the sense that that's where we live, and that's where the predominant number of our events take place. But we're based in Bristol, and we connected with the Film Audience Network in the Southwest, and that's what developed us to become Southwest Silence, to try and show films more widely in the region. And we've connected with a number of exhibitors in the region, but over time we've found that our reach has stretched a little bit beyond the region to show film events even at the fringes of the Southwest, or what you might charitably call the Southwest, because it even goes up to, say, Borderlands Film Festival, and even all the way down to Hampshire. It's sort of like, it's not Southwest in the sense of like Cornwall and Dorset, which is perhaps what people traditionally think of the Southwest. But yes, in response to your point about taking funding to show niche films to a niche audience who very well then may not turn up in their own right anyways and are already paying for the ticket, in some respects, I view it as keeping the flame alive of one kind of film exhibition. And yes, it is serving a niche audience, and sometimes we do things which break out beyond the niche audiences, but it's us, in some respects, putting on content which the BFI wants us to show, which in demographic terms is archive and heritage film to audiences that aren't wholly over 40, to be blunt. And in that regards, we're quite well regarded by the funders, because we get otherwise underserved and underseen content, for want of a better term, out to audiences that would possibly not otherwise engage with it, which is talking about what we do in very mechanical and boring terms, because we don't view it as content, we don't view it as demographics that we're targeting, but for the sakes of funding, that's what it is.
Okay, but so then this is even more crucial. If this is the sort of crux of what I think we'd like to kind of maybe scratch at, is that that's the nuts and bolts of what the funding calls it, and what, that's how that functions. But then what is the value of it, which is obviously the reason that you do it, the thing that you're trying to achieve. So, what is the kind of trade-off between this very dry content, this language even that we use that is, very industry, to talk about, the exploitation of content, or to talk about, the sort of audience development and what is essentially marketing. But what really is the value of this? What does it mean to you, and why are you doing it?
The value of it is finding films which stimulate and engage us, and bringing them to cinephile audiences to be stimulated and engaged by. In many respects, it's as with a lot of cinephilic films, I'm not necessarily interested in showing you the best films or the absolute best of the bunch. It's about showing you an interesting film, or a film which historically jars or rubs against your perceived notion of a period, of a people, of a culture, of a nation, of a subject, or even of a theme, and makes you reconsider that and consider it in a new context. And sometimes that context is just seeing it with an audience in a really big room with live music or a really good recorded score. It just makes people re-engage and rethink with it. And on a very superficial level, it's, I've seen this really great film and I really think you should see it. And then getting people to see it, and I'm not asking them to love it, I'm asking them to just go, that was an interesting film. That's unlike anything else I've seen this week.
And why are you asking them to do that? What is the I guess what I'm trying to dig at is what's like the ethical or moral or your passionate imperative to get other people to see that. So when you see something and you think, I guess it's that like Kantian question, you think it's pleasurable, you think it's sublime. Why do you want to try to convince somebody else that it is that thing? What is the motivation to do that?
I guess the drive is the simple fact that I have the means to share that with other people. And so I try to share that with other people because I really value it when other people have done that to me. I have found it as aging and tired cinephile who maybe doesn't have the time or the energies that I used to have. I'm still driven by the simple energy of someone coming to me and saying, you have to see this film, or like, have you seen this film? I can't believe you haven't seen this film. You really need to see this film. This film is amazing. Oh, is it any good? And it's like, no, but it'll blow your mind what it does with this or that. And that's, the sort of hyperbolic kernel. And it's not even a case of, those are the easiest films to program, are the ones where you're like, oh my God, holy shit, you have to see this because it's just unlike anything else. The classic one I can think of is a silent film called Behind the Curtain, which we showed several years ago now, well before the pandemic. And it's striking because it's political silent film, but it's also really violent in quite a realistic way, and it gets quite gory at points, and it's also quite bleak. It does a lot of things which people would not expect a silent film to do.
It sounds as though this concept of sharing something that you value is inherently significant to you.
Yes, I think it's interesting because so many conversations around curatorship, or the discussion around curatorship, is often about gatekeeping and protecting and steering and dictating what is and isn't good. And that's not where my interest comes from. And a lot of cinephile friends that I have, it's not about sort of being didactic in what I think is good and what you should see. It's just wanting to share something that which stimulated and engaged me, and I think might tickle your nodes if you're cinephilic like me. And if it doesn't, I'm also interested to hear that. But then the question is, I'm not looking for an audience of people to sit around and nod their heads and stroke their chins and go, yes, yes, that was wonderful. If anything, I just want people to watch a film and to engage with it, either in a different way or in a way that has made them think about a film. Other examples I can think of is we've shown, and this is a top tier A1 film list classic, Nanook of the North, the quote unquote first documentary ever made, which it's not, it's a starting point for a discussion. And by introducing that in a certain context, we could engage a packed audience to really rethink how they viewed that film, because a lot of people come to it with a lot of baggage in terms of what they expect the film to be and what they expect a silent film to be. And the context and the history of that film is really, really, really very complicated and very, very interesting. And that context is really valuable if you try to make audiences confront that.
It sounds as though there's an element of sharing something that you value, but on the other hand, potentially there's more of a concept of sharing your values. So is what you're sharing the thing, the content, in inverted commas, what we call content? Is it the film? Is that the thing that you're sharing? Is it Nanook of the North? Or is it your value system, in that you think it's significant to watch and learn more about Nanook of the North, so that in an overarching way you are better equipped to understand and critically view documentary as a form of discourse? That's what I'm kind of...
That's a good way of putting it, because part of it was we want to show a silent film which lots of people are very eager to see on the big screen. That's the very, very simple thing, that if we program this, people will come. It's on lists, it's on curricula, it's in people's heads, it's an association they have. But then my excitement is trying to get people to engage critically, or more critically, with their perceived notion of what the film is, but also what their perceived notion of what a documentary more generally is.
And I guess then the next question to follow on is why? Why do you want people to do that? Is that because you like teaching? Is it because you think that other people's lives will be enriched or that they personally would benefit from knowing or having this critical tool in their tool belt? I sort of wonder, like, what is the driving force to want to do this? We don't just show people films because we think the films are good, although I think that is a significant element of it. But there obviously is something else driving it. It's like, why do we want to share it? What do you want to communicate? How much of it is about ego? How much of it is about the content? How much of it is about a critical tool or something else or a deeper value system? Or is that not there?
I'd say the simple thing, and it's a hangover from academia, which imbues me with an interest and a passion for talking about, discussing, and teaching things. Definitely. But the very, very simple answer, which any academic on any given subject, if approached by the layman, the very simple response to almost any question or observation made is, I think you'll find it's a bit more complicated than that. Is Nanook of the North the first documentary film? Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, because by stating that, you're being very firm and narrow in what your understanding of a documentary is. And you're also being very narrow-minded in understanding what that category is. I'm excited by pushing back and making people think like, well, what is a documentary? Why do I view this as a documentary and not that as a documentary? And why does that term mean something to me? And I like people reflecting on it. I don't wish to sit and tell them what a documentary is. That's not my job, as it were. It's interesting that I'm labeling myself with a job here. My excitement and energy with that is asking and stating things which provoke thought, reflection, and action in a film-going audience.
What is the reason for wanting other people to see things the way you see them? Because you feel like people need to share values? Is it about just connecting to other people? And what is it that we're trying to do when we do this? I mean, I used to write about film at length, and I used to think it was really, really important to write film criticism. I thought it was really important. I don't actually think that anymore. And I think, why did I used to think it was important to do this? Because I need people to understand my reading of the film, because I want to write my reading of the film because I think it's clever, because I like to understand my own thoughts. I mean, those are all some of the reasons, but I'm just curious as to what is driving this independent cinema exhibition that is so important that we have to do it despite the fact that, it's not heavily unionized. We don't, we use public funds, but we don't all get paid fairly. We're in an inequitable industry. We don't seem to have a sustainable business model. We have dwindling audiences. And so why are we doing it?
I'm putting on films, I'm presenting films, and I'm talking about films because I have the opportunity to do so. And the reward to do so is not financial. It sustains me in some ways, but I drop in and out of it fleetingly because it isn't sustained. But I don't think that I necessarily would do it more if it was more lucrative, necessarily. On a very selfish level, I guess the critic could say that I just love the sound of my own voice, but I love the sound of talking to people and getting a reaction and response to people to what I'm saying. I guess it's like anyone who is on stage or a stand-up comedian or a speaker or whatever, is the value of speaking and being heard and people engaging with what you think and feel.
We've touched on some really significant issues, but I think that there's an awful lot that we didn't get to say on today's episode. And some of these are really just starting off points for what really needs to be a much deeper discussion. Thank you so much for joining me, Peter. It was wonderful to hear your insights. I've covered a lot of fertile ground in this first episode of In Demand, and I'm happy to have kickstarted this ongoing conversation on independent cinema exhibition with you. Big thank you today to Dr. Walsh for joining me, to the South West and Wales Doctoral Training Programme and Faux Show Studios in Glasgow for producing and supporting this podcast, and to you, the listener, for joining us. What's next will follow after a bit of a break, but I will be back in 2025 with a full series dedicated to the dialogical, and I will be joined by other practitioners in the field, starting with the very legendary cinema curator from Bristol's award-winning Watershed, Mr. Mark Cosgrove. But What can you do now, I hear you ask? You can keep up to date with my research journey and future announcements about the forthcoming series over on my Instagram page. If you liked this episode, or if you did not like this episode, you could check out the other podcasts in this limited series, as each show is unique and not at all like this one. And finally, if you want to know more about the people, places and ideas that Dr. Walsh and I discussed, you can head to the show notes where you'll find all the necessary links. That's it from me, Tara Judah, and that's a wrap for In Demand.